So she's here today to talk about maintaining our commitment to strong national defense in these challenging economic times with a view from the Armed Services Committee. So today we're proud to welcome a wife and mother, a teacher, farmer, entrepreneur, legislator, and leader, freshman Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your very kind introduction, and I feel very honored to get to be here at this very important before this very important group, to talk about something that is near and dear, I think, to all of our hearts, and that is the national security of our country. As you mentioned, I firmly believe, there's only a few things we should be doing in Congress, and one of them is to provide for the common defense. And we have to keep that as a priority. And so as I grapple with the whole budget issue with my fellow colleagues, and as I work on Armed Services Committee, certainly this is the challenge that we are trying to face. And I do feel very honored to represent the 4th District in Missouri. Hi, Mike. Which is home to the Whiteman Air Force Base and Fort Leonard Wood, and also Missouri National Guard headquarters. And those are very, very important installations, not only to our area, but to the entire nation and to our national security. And so I feel very honored to be on the Armed Services Committee. My father was in the U.S. Army Reserves, and I always grew up with a very deep appreciation of what our men and women in uniform do for us and the sacrifices they and their families give to our country. And so I feel very honored to be there fighting on their behalf and on all of our behalfs for a strong national defense. Certainly there are a lot of threats facing our country right now. There are foreign threats, and then there are domestic threats. And I've had the opportunity in this past year and a half to personally learn more about that and to see firsthand those threats. Some of the experiences that I've had is I did have the opportunity to lead a congressional delegation last year over Mother's Day to Afghanistan. I understand this is like the 3rd or 4th year where a group of congresswomen have gone over there to take the heart of the American mother to our troops and to thank them for their service and to let them know how much we appreciate it. But it was also very important to see firsthand the challenges there, as well as the gains that we have made, to meet with General Petraeus, as well as at that time Ambassador Eikenberry, to see the before and after pictures of where al-Qaeda was, where they are now, where the poppy fields were before, where they are now, and to see how we have made real progress there. And of course, the most important progress we have is that we have not had another attack on our soil since 9/11, because we took the fight to them until we're being proactive and going after the terrorists. But I also had an opportunity to travel to Israel, who, of course, I have believe so strongly in, and our relationship with them, and it was very good to be able to see firsthand, to go on the border and to see areas that have rockets pointed right at them, to go to the Syrian border, see that. We weren't able to go to the Gaza Strip because they were launching rockets into the south part of Israel while we were there. But to understand the challenges they're facing, and also emphasize the strategic partnership that we have with them. But I've also, of course, had opportunities to work very closely with the leadership and the commanders at my bases to get to know the military families, the veterans in our community, to hear their stories, to learn more of their sacrifice, to be with families when their husbands or wife deployed, and then just 2 Sundays ago got to be part of a welcome home ceremony. But I'll have to share with you the most difficult, but yes, the highest privilege I've had as a representative is getting to have the opportunity to share a flag, to give a flag to a mother who lost her son in Afghanistan, who gave his last full measure of devotion to this country. And so all of those experiences shape what I do on Armed Services Committee and what we are doing. And I thought today I would just kind of share some of the threats that I have seen, and you're probably aware of, and just kind of expound a little bit on some of those, foreign and domestic, and where we're at right now today as we are on the House floor debating the National Defense Authorization Act. So this is a very timely hearing. But certainly we have a lot of domestic or foreign threats. Afghanistan, will start there, epitomizes the terrorist threat and how we've taken it to them. As I mentioned, we have made a lot of gains there, but it's very tricky, very, very complex society, very complex issue. There's not easy answers Of course, we're starting now to draw down and to pull back our forces. I just want to make sure that the gains that we have made are not lost, that the sacrifices that are made are not in vain. And I want to make sure that decisions that are made there are based on calculations made by our commanders on the ground and not for political reasons. And so I have some concerns there, but certainly I'm thrilled for the families to see them coming home. But it's a very, very complex issue, and we're certainly going to continuing to watch that. And hopefully the Army in Afghanistan that's being developed and the police forces that I got to see being trained, they will be able to take over, and the government there will be able to carry on the good work and protect the people. One thing we did get to do while I was in Afghanistan is meet with a group of women parliament members. Of course, their constitution requires a third, I believe it is, of the members of the parliament to be women. And, of course, this is huge historic gains for them. About 50% of the women, I think, that I saw while I was there, as we were driving from one place to another, was still wearing the burqa. And as we had dinner with these women from the Afghanistan parliament, I was so impressed with not only their intellect and their vision, but their courage. They shared stories of how they are now, because they took the burqa off, now they're in leadership, that they're on the Taliban hit list. And if ever the government reverts back to Taliban hands, they will probably be no more. And they each told horrific stories of different family members that had perished over the last few years and things. So on the one hand, it's very concerning, but on the other hand, inspiring. And it's encouraging. They say, we want for our daughters a better life than we had. And we want them to have the opportunities that other women have in other countries and that we have now. So that gives you a different perspective on what we've been doing there and how important it is. But there's also the threat of terrorists from other parts of the world. Yemen, specifically, of course, is growing as we've pushed al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. They're moving over to Pakistan, to Yemen. And the recent terrorist plot that thankfully was discovered, and thankfully we had an operative working in there that was able to take that information to our government and thwart the potential attack in the airline. That's a growing concern, certainly, as they're very committed to continuing to come up with new ways to try to harm us. But thankfully that was stopped. Iran, of course, is a very real threat to us and to our best friend, our neighbor, our ally, Israel. They have leadership that has promised to blow up Israel off the face of the map, and that's concerning. And they continue to build their capacity and capabilities for nuclear weapons, despite continued efforts by the UN and by other countries to try to stop that. And so certainly that is very destabilizing to the entire area, and it potentially could be very damaging, as well as they're the largest supporter of terrorism in the world as far as a nation, and they are supplying Hezbollah with rockets and being supportive through their friend Syria. So that's a very destabilizing concern. North Korea is very concerning as well. They have nuclear weapons, and there's unpredictable leadership there. We don't know what provocation in the future, may cause them to act. Recently, as you know, they shot off a rocket supposedly to put a satellite in orbit, for their TV or something. Well, we very much believe that was just another step in their effort to try to develop a successful long-range missile to reach actually the United States, the western coast. And they're continuing, it seems, to develop it. Now, thankfully, it went up and then it crashed. So we hope that they will continue to be unsuccessful. We recently had a subcommittee hearing in HASC looking at the Pacific region, PACOM, what some of the challenges were there. And Commander James Thurman shared some information that was new to me. You may be aware of it, but that North Korea has, they believe, the largest number of special operations teams of any country in the world. And they're highly trained, and they're ready, and they trained at any given notice to drop into South Korea, to attack, to cause problems or whatever at a moment's notice, and they're so close. They're right next to each other. So obviously, there's a lot of concerns with North Korea. We need to keep our eye on them and be ready to meet any challenge that may happen there. The last nation I wanted to mention is certainly one that you would probably think of. What nation haven't I mentioned that you think of? China, yes. I thought you would probably. They are a real threat, both economically and militarily. I had the opportunity when I was a state representative, and this was several years ago, but to go on an exchange trip, a young government leader exchange trip to China, and for 2 weeks. And I was very. I came away even more sobered by the things I learned there, the things I saw. The communist leaders said at some of our meetings, we plan to be the world's largest economic power in 5 years, and you can't stop us. I mean, that was one of the quotes. Now, it has been 5 years. I don't think they're quite there, but they're very committed. They're very focused, and with this type of government, they can direct resources. They can take money from here, and they can put it over here to strategically do that. What is concerning, certainly a threat aspect to us, is the debt. As you know, we owe almost $16 trillion, and of that, almost half of that is foreign-held debt. Of the foreign-held debt, approximately 29% of that is owned by China. So I think that puts us in a very precarious position to have a country like China owe so much of their debt to them. In fact, the money that we are paying them just on the interest on the debt, they have the ability to buy 3 Joint Strike Fighters every week and have $50 million left over. We don't know for sure. We can't say they're doing that, but we do know that they are building up their military. Last year, is my understanding, they were building 14 nuclear subs. We were building 1. Last year, they came out with their version of their own stealth aircraft plane, and they also came out with their own version, their version of an aircraft carrier busting bomb with about a 1,200-mile range, which should almost reach Guam and getting close to Hawaii, to push the U.S. Navy out of the China Seas and that whole area, leaving our friend Taiwan very vulnerable. They've been increasing their naval operations around Taiwan, and they're very much engaged in trying to develop technology cyber, to block our satellite and communications things. So those are some things we know. And so we have reason to be concerned there. But we also have reason to be concerned from a commerce and business standpoint, our economy. China saw, I think, a few years back, that after the fall of the Soviet Union, they needed to be strong militarily. They needed to be strong economically. And so since their form of government doesn't encourage or inspire innovation, they have, it seems to me, proactively decided to just steal from us our technology and to shortcut them developing their own plans and programs. And so every day there are thousands of Chinese who that is all they do. They go to work and they try to hack into our companies. They try to hack into our military facilities. They try to steal our secrets, our business plans, our formulas, and they're being very successful about it. As you know, a couple weeks ago in the House, we passed a bill to address some of the cyber threats. I attended 3 security briefings, classified briefings that week. I can't share all of those things, but I can pass on a few things that Chairman Mike Rogers shared. And he said that over the last few years, Chinese hackers have stolen enough intellectual property from our companies that it would equal 50 times the volume of the Library of Congress if it were to be printed out. Now that is hard to believe, but that's reality. There also are examples of pesticide companies, in this one pesticide company in America who was just ready to go online in production of a new pesticide. All of a sudden, it started being produced, exact same formula, over in China, much lower price. And anyway, they claim it cost 20,000 American jobs because of that. They've stolen pharmaceutical formulas and other things. So China has the largest espionage spy ring in the country. And I've often, I was thinking on the light side, but the next 007 James Bond movie that comes out really should have China and the spies in China as being the other side, because it's really a reality and something we are trying to grapple with to stop this, because we don't want them to drain all of our secrets over there and get an economic advantage. You know, Thomas Jefferson said, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And certainly I think that holds true as we watch China. We've got to be vigilant. We've got to be careful. We've got to address the fundamental threat to our economy and make sure that their efforts are thwarted in that regard. And like I said, militarily, you know, they're a threat in that they're growing so much, their military, and have plans to be a dominant military power. So that's on that cheery note. You know, there are, I think you would agree, a lot of threats facing us, and there's a lot beyond that we could talk about, but certainly looking at terrorists, Iran, and China and the cyber threat. And also, just one quick note on the cyber threat. It's not just China. We also have Russia, and now Iran is also very technical, very advanced. The Russians are doing more criminal activity. Of the one credit card company here in America claims that they are trying to be hacked into 300 times a day, trying to steal that financial information, trying to steal your Social Security numbers, your bank numbers, and that sort of thing. So it's competing computer programs. I mean, they're trying to, you know, hack with their computer programs, and thankfully we are so far able to stop them. But it's something we have to be vigilant about. The domestic threat goes to, I think, our budget and finding adequate financing for our national defense. It is costly, but it is priceless, as that commercial says. The national defense is priceless. It is one of the few things, like I said, that we're supposed to be doing, is to provide for the common defense. And so what we have now in Congress is a battle of priorities. The limited dollars we have, how should we spend them? And I believe we need to make sure and invest in national security more than anything. Historically, we are spending less on national defense than we were back in the Cold War days, before the Kennedy presidency, less than we were in the Carter administration, even. So we're only spending about 4% of our GDP now on national defense. Other countries like China, they're spending more than that. And if you look at the history, we now are spending less as a percentage of our entire budget on national defense than they were after World War II, right around World War II. We also have a challenge with our funding in regard to the spending levels. We seem to not be learning from history. As you look back on the financing over history, over time, you see we ramp up when there's a conflict, and then we ramp back down. And then the next conflict comes, and so we're not prepared, we're behind, the equipment's old, the troops aren't trained, we need more troops, and so we ramp it up again. And this cyclical defense spending is not wise. I think we'd be better off having a stable, adequate level of funding that endures, because we never know. I mean, yes, we're coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan, but with all these other pending threats, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I'm not for all the cuts that have been proposed. Our readiness, we also, another reason to justify spending money is that we have some issues. We have some readiness issues. I'm on the subcommittee of readiness in HASC. Right now we have 285 ships, which is less than what the Navy says that they really need. It's over 300. We have many of our airplanes over 50 years old, still flying today. And this is a pretty sobering statistic they shared, that only 50% of our Navy aircraft is mission capable on any given day. They have to cannibalize off another, say it's an F-18 Hornet or whatever, there, and take the part from there to put on the one so this one can go fly. Plus, after 10 years being involved in a conflict, we need to reset. We need to modernize. We had a subcommittee hearing with some of the commanders over in Afghanistan talking about this, just the logistics of pulling back, getting the troops back, getting the equipment back. And they talked about the number of Humvees, the number of tanks, the number of other equipment that they're just leaving in Afghanistan. They're either, one, giving them to the Afghan forces, or they're parting them out or something. Just because they're so old, they're so worn out, it's not worth the cost of putting them on a plane and bring them over here. So we need to reset. We need to replace those. We need to modernize them, and that all costs money. As you know, the defense has taken some cuts over the last few years, and certainly after the passage of the debt ceiling deal, the Budget Control Act in August, which I voted against, by the way, for several reasons. But one of the reasons is because of this. It automatically cut, at that point, $487 billion over the next 10 years out of our national defense. And this is when we already, like I just said, we have planes 50 years old. We have half of the Navy aircraft can't operate, and we need to be modernizing. So that is already set in motion. Those cuts that the Defense Department says will mean about 100,000 less soldiers and Marines that'll be able to defend our country, that will be laid off, if you will. And the thing is, that represents, at this point, of the cuts that have been made in the government the last few years, even though defense is only 20% of the budget, it is absorbing about 50% of all of the cuts that have been proposed. So I don't think that's good. Then, of course, as you know, the Budget Control Act also set up the debt ceiling committee and super committee, some people call it. They were supposed to find the $1.2 trillion of cuts, and if they were unsuccessful, then the sequestration would take place. That's where we're at today. So, as you know, coming January, we're facing another $500 billion of more cuts to defense. So you put those two together, that's almost $1 trillion less to our national defense over the next 10 years. That is supposed to happen. That severe of cuts is going to result in the hollowing out of our forces. Even Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta said that, and has said that repeatedly. Every commander that came before HASC said that. It will decimate us. And so we can't allow that to happen. Just as a practical basis, what that could mean is 100,000 additional soldiers out. So that would be 200,000 soldiers. Instead of coming back to ticker tape parades, they're coming back to pink slips. And instead of being able to continue to stand strong for the military, they're going to be standing in unemployment lines. I think that's wrong. It's going to mean that the Air Force would be the smallest in history with the number of planes that they would put out of service. It means you couldn't modernize our nuclear deterrent, which needs to be replaced. A lot of those nuclear bombs and the equipment was made in the 50s and 60s. We need to modernize it, update it, to make sure that they're ready to go. And there has been a call for 2 rounds of BRAC, base realignments and closures, as part of this. So those are just, a few of the things, but it also will have devastating impacts on the defense industry, and we're already seeing that. The contractors need to know what's going to happen next year, and they need to be able to plan multi-year projects, whether it's building a tank or an airplane. You can't just turn it off and turn it on, and so we have defense workers right now being laid off. If sequestration goes into effect, they believe that it could actually result in 1.5 million jobs, that down the line the trickle effect would be impacted with this, and it could raise our unemployment rate back over 9% as a country. So this is concerning. We've got to preserve and protect our defense industry in this country. We have fewer and fewer companies out there able to even build a ship for the Navy, or able to have the capacity to build a fighter airplane. And if any of those plants have to close down, they may not be there in 5 years if you need them. They just can't have people waiting in the wings to work. People find other jobs, and et cetera. So I think it's important that we continue to invest in that, and that is a very real concern of mine. Plus, it would stifle our research and development, which has given us the edge over every other country. is our new technology that has come out in our equipment. They're building now, and it's been a very controversial, difficult program, but the F-35 is a whole new generation aircraft, designing something that has never been before, with capacities that have never even been thought possible. And it's our country, it's our companies that are being the innovators and continuing to keep us safer through the technology. And we've got to keep that going. So I'm very much opposed to sequestration and trying to reverse that. There's a couple of ways that we are doing that. First of all, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Buck McKeon, has immediately almost introduced a bill once this came into reality that sequestration might take place, and the Super Committee had failed. His bill would replace just 1 year of sequestration next year with money from attrition of the federal workforce over the next 10 years. This wouldn't be a complete solution, but it at least would give more time to try to come up with other ways to address that. I'm a co-sponsor. I think we're up now to 60 or 70 co-sponsors on that bill. But the other thing we did is passed in the House a bill called the Sequester Replacement Reconciliation Act. They're big names. But anyway, getting the money back for sequestration is what it means. We went out as the House and several committees and found additional dollars that could be cut from other areas of government, waste, fraud, duplicative programs, to streamline our government, make it efficient and effective, but also to take those extra dollars and to put them towards the sequestration so that it would stop it. It passed. Like I said, it's going to go over to the Senate, and I'm certainly hopeful that they will prioritize it and pass it as well. I don't know if they will, but they should. So we are also, as we speak this hour, debating our National Defense Authorization Act. And that is, of course, a very important piece of legislation every year. If we can get this passed, it's a nice tradition on the Hill that it'll be 51 years now that we have successfully passed this. While you have many other bills not going anywhere, one body or the other, I'm glad to know that Congress still prioritizes our national defense. It came out of House committee last week, my committee, and now it's on the House floor. Hopefully we'll get it voted on by Friday, and then it'll go over to the Senate, and I see that they will pass it too. There's always contentious issues. But in that, we did restore a lot of the cuts that the President had proposed. They were going to mothball some ships, some airplanes, and we restored the funding for that, and we found funding for that. And so I could go over all the details there, but bottom line, we're just trying to ensure that these cuts don't decimate our national defense and reprioritizing them as the priority they should be. And I feel very good about that. Our men and women in uniform have given their all to us, and I think it's important that we give our all to them, but also give our all to our neighbors, to our families, to our children, our grandchildren, to make sure that we've done everything possible to keep our country safe. Because this is a broad national purpose that we have. There's so much that goes on here in the federal government that is beyond our Constitution, that could be done by the individual or should be done with state and local government. But you and I as individuals can't take on Iran, or we can't take on the espionage efforts of China, or whatever. This is something collectively that we can do together, and that's what our tax dollars are for, so we can invest in those things. And even though we live in dangerous times, I have found on the positive side, though, we still have the best, the strongest military in the world. And we have teams out there that are countering the espionage and successfully thwarting the attempts that are being waged against our country. And we can feel good about that. And I'm so, several people have referenced this generation of fighting men and women. Last week I got to go out to the World War II Memorial to recognize an honor flight that comes in from my state. And these precious, precious patriots who get off the bus in their 80s and 90s. There was one man that was 100. And he's turning 101 the next week. And to hear their stories, but to get to shake their hand and to thank them, I mean, they're called the greatest generation, and they saved our country and our world to keep us free with their sacrifices. But, a lot of people say now we have truly another next greatest generation. The men and women fighting today are the most skilled, the most seasoned soldiers our country has ever had, because they have been fighting for 10 years. They've been deployed multiple times, and they're giving tremendous sacrifices but doing great, great work. So we can feel good about that, and I just know that I'm going to try to continue to do all I can to give them everything they need and to ensure our country stays strong, and appreciate all of what you do and your support, and for featuring this very important topic this month. I don't think there's a higher priority. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
Oh, sure. Great. We have some time for some questions for the Congresswoman, and I know we have a microphone in the auditorium, so I'll let you recognize the speaker, but if you can wait and give your name and where you're working or where you're from to give guidance to the Congresswoman, and then the microphone will help us with the recording as well. So I'll let you. Any questions? Anyone have a particular question?
I'd like to hear what they're concerned about. We have a lot of younger leaders here, and I'd be interested in what's on your mind too. If you're concerned about question or comment?
There's a question in that. Yeah.
Thank you for coming to speak to us today. My question was regarding you mentioned what you and Buck McKeon and the other members of HASC have been doing in terms of addressing what might happen if sequestration goes into effect. But what measures has HASC taken to address areas of waste, fraud, and abuse in defense? Because we know that's not an area of the government that's immune from those things.
Sure. When I first took office last January, I got to hear within a week or two from, at that time, Secretary of Defense Gates. And he had, on his own, initiated a program within the Department of Defense to try to come up with $100 million worth of efficiencies within the department where waste is, fraud, to realign those priorities. And they came up with at least 78 million of that. So that was part of the continuing resolution last year. And now they've got the $487 billion that is in effect. And so they're having to get leaner and trim and get efficiencies just because that is in effect, and we are not trying to reverse that. In our hearings, we ask a lot of tough questions. And so there have been a lot of questions asked to defense on waste, how can you be more efficient. And one thing that comes up over and over again is I guess they still don't have an auditable budget, which is just kind of beyond me. Like I said, I'm a former home economics teacher. I used to teach my kids how to budget. I'm like, well, I don't get it. So that has been, we very much have tried to push the Department of Defense to get their act together, make sure they're doing everything they can to eliminate any waste. And like I said, these $487 billion worth of cuts are certainly going to force them to have to do that. But we don't think they could incur $1 trillion worth of cuts, and so that's why we're opposed to the additional $500 trillion, because that's beyond all waste. I think General Odinero, I have a quote in here from him. He said, "We've taken all the efficiencies we can take." They've tried to trim waste and efficiencies, but they can't go anymore. So, yeah.
I'm not sure if this is in your arena. I'm Colette Capra. I'm at Heritage. But in addition to the cyber theft that you described, is cyber terrorism something that you've been briefed on too? Mm-hmm. And is there anything you want to say about our vulnerability there?
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think what I can share and what I can't. In that it is a concern. Just what public knowledge is. Most of our electrical systems now, most of our wastewater systems, everything is on a grid, an electrical grid that is accessed now through the internet. And so that enables the manager, supervisor to sit in the office and they can check various power stations or whatever from his computer. But that also gives a stream that potentially is a vulnerability if someone were to hack into it. So it is a concern. And, there is a concern we could have an event like Pearl Harbor, but it not be with bombs, but be with, through a cyber attack. If you just were able to shut off water, for instance, to New York City, shut down the water system for 2 days. Imagine the panic that would ensue and potential life-threatening problems, or electricity or whatever. So it doesn't even have to be on a grand scale. If you just do it even on a small scale, it could have the same impact as a 9/11, which was very narrow and focused in the attack, but of course it had economic ramifications across the country, shook and rattled people and the trust of our government. And so, yes, that is a real area of concern. Mm-hmm. But just on the other side, know that we have a large group, too, of people who are trained, and at this point we are smarter than they are, and hope that continues. So we're encourage young people, the best and brightest computer IT people, to consider working for our government, because we need you. It's a different form of service to your country. They have a poster down in the intelligence part of the Capitol where I got my briefing. I don't think it's okay to share the poster, but it's kind of like a 1950s cartoon showing the spies, but it said something about the unsung heroes of our country that nobody knows about. They can't tell their story, but yet on a daily basis are serving their country and serving us by going into their computer every day and using their gifts and talents on behalf of our country. So if you're smart in computers, talk to Homeland Security.
I have a question. You, on your website, you have an exchange, I guess it's on your YouTube channel. Who would have thought a congressman would have a YouTube channel? The exchange at a hearing over a BRAC proposal that the Pentagon was putting forward, and your questioning really revealed the kind of lack of planning that went into it. I just wanted to get your reaction, and if you can kind of share that in terms of, we're talking about waste, fraud, and abuse, but I wonder if you're also maybe concerned a little bit that they're not as thoughtfully planning the cuts that they are proposing.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I, from the beginning, had done some research on BRACs and thought I don't support this, mainly because in 2005, the last round of BRACs cost $37 or $39 billion to implement. When they shut down these bases, they have to go in, and it's very costly. They move everybody. There's the environmental stuff. Anyway, it's very costly. So it cost, 37. I'll use a lower figure. I can't remember which one, but $37 billion. And they say it won't even break even until 2018, and then maybe it'll start saving the country some money. So it's very costly. And I thought, we have limited defense dollars as it is now. We don't want to be wasting $37 billion. Plus, even with the drawdown, we're still going to have more troops than post 9/11 in our country. They still need to have housing. They still need, and all these threats that I see. So I don't support it. Well, when we came to the hearing, and we had the Undersecretary of Defense there coming forward proposing this BRAC, and of course it came out in their new defense strategy that was released, and that's where it originally came from. Some of my colleagues and I tried to get them to justify why. First of all, say, are you proposing the BRACs because you believe it'll be cost savings, because you want to save money, or is it because of your defense strategy? And they kind of went back and forth, but two of them said, well, it's just because of our new defense strategy. We just think we need less. It's not because we're going to save money. But okay, so then it came to me, and I asked the question, okay, it cost $37 or $39 billion in 2005. If we have a new BRAC, like we grant you what you're asking for, what do you anticipate would be the cost of this? And the Undersecretary said, I don't know. And I said, okay, well, what savings do you think? I'm sure you would have some sort of goal in mind that we want to save X number of dollars, so this is a justification, we're going to close this, this, and this. And what would be the goal? What would be the savings? We don't know. I don't know. And I said, okay, so do you believe you have excessive infrastructure? Is this the rationale for doing it? And if so, what percentage of infrastructure do you believe currently is excessive? We don't know. And so I said, you're coming before Congress, you're asking us to authorize the closing of bases, yet you can't tell us how much it's going to cost, how much it's going to save, or the excessive infrastructure percentage that we have. I said, it's not going to work. You need to give us more specific justification before we would put our communities through this and before we would expend these very precious defense dollars. And so we did stop the BRAC out of committee last week. There's an amendment passed saying there won't be any BRAC next year. And we'll see what happens on the House floor. But anyway, it's going to be an interesting process. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your inspirational talk.
Oh, thank you.
Owen Graham, I work on the defense team here at Heritage. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the impact on the Guard and Reserve in your state and from the cuts, and also the potential sequester. I understand could be quite devastating in that regard. Also wanted to ask about the readiness. As you mentioned, we have readiness problems across the entire spectrum of our military. Are you confident you're going to be able to receive the information from our services, from depots, and from unit commanders regarding the overall state of readiness in order to have timely warning, to be able to take remedial legislative actions before the damage becomes worse in readiness?
I'm very proud of our subcommittee chairman, Randy Forbes. He is phenomenal, and he digs deep in this, and he asks for classified information from the chiefs, and he reads the reports, and some of us on the committee have read different parts of it. But he's like a dog on the bone, as we would say back home on the farm. But on this issue, and I admire him and appreciate his efforts, he's had numerous hearings to bring this out, bring it to light, to ask the commanders to come here and ask those pointed questions, to try to get on the record really the state of our military right now and our readiness, and how there are some gaps. We don't want to go too far and let our enemies know, but it's our responsibility to make sure our country has all that it needs, and we need that information to be able to make those determinations. And so I think we will be able to. It's not easy, especially in a public hearing. They want to make it sound not scare the public, or they want to be, I don't know, I shouldn't say that. But anyway, it's not necessarily easy, but we are committed to trying to get that information. And the Guard and Reserve, in the President's budget, he was going to try to cut down on a lot of their aircraft, a lot of their manpower, but we have reversed that as of last week, and we restored that because it's very important. Plus, it doesn't make sense to me. If you read their National Defense Strategy that came out, which I did, they talk about a shift. They're going to cut down the soldiers and Marines over here, but they're going to rely more heavily on the Reserve Guard for whatever crises may arise. So if that's the truth, then why are you trying to cut them? I mean, it doesn't make sense. So we've restored it. We'll see what the Senate does, but hopefully we'll be able to keep that strong. These citizen soldiers over the last 10 years have been converted to basically a different type of active force. I mean, they're just trained just as much as active duty, and they have gone and they've deployed multiple times, and it's actually cost savings to utilize them compared to the active force because they come and go. But I really, really admire them, and they're leaving their families and their jobs, then coming back. So we need to make sure and watch out for them too. Yes.
I'm Kumi Yokoe, Senior Visiting Fellow of Heritage Foundation from Japan. Do you have any thoughts on U.S.-Japan alliance toward the threat you mentioned today?
Any words on the U.S.-Japan alliance towards the threats we face today that you mentioned? Mm-hmm.
I'm not an expert really on that, but I know that our relationship with Japan is very important, and everything I understand is that it's good. It's a good, positive relationship, and we certainly appreciate their partnership to address the threats in the Asian Pacific area. And of course, with the earthquake that happened there, our Navy was there, and we deployed a lot of resources to help the people of Japan, and I think we help everyone, but I think certainly we were happy to do that because Japan has been so important to us. So I'm sure we're going to continue to make sure we have a strong relationship there with our friend.
One last question over here. Yeah, this will be the
Thank you. Ed Oliveras on behalf of the Guam U.S.-Asia Security Alliance. In follow-up to the previous question, are you satisfied with the revised agreement between the U.S. and Japan with regard to the restationing of Marines from Okinawa to Guam? There were originally going to be about 9,000 Marines going to Guam. Now that number is down to 5,000. Most of the Marines that will remain in the Western Pacific will be on a rotational basis rather than permanently based forward. And as General Dunford, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, testified in front of your subcommittee last year, I believe, it would take 7 consecutive miracles to get those Marines from the West Coast forward to a crisis spot in Asia. Are you satisfied with the new agreement?
I would say I'm not an expert on that either, but I do sit on the subcommittee with Madam Boothe, and I just have so much respect for her. I think she's doing a great job representing Guam, and as well as has such a good feel for the overall national security of our country. And I know she is not, I don't know, but I've picked up she's not pleased with the agreement, and I understand there has been a time delay and challenges in making that transition from Japan, and I thought, my impression was that Japan was in support of that too. It was, so I don't understand all the details on that, but I we'll certainly visit with Representative Rodaya more on that, because that's something that I need to know about more.
Thank you so much. This was a great talk. I know we have a few gifts that we'd like to give. We usually share with our Conservative Women's Network speaker and our Clare Boothe Luce folks. Always have some great items to share with us. Catherine,
nice surprise. Thank
Sure,
you.
absolutely. Our president, Michelle Easton, could not be here today, so I'm here on behalf of her. And I just want to present you with a few things. This is our limited edition, our new limited edition coffee mug with Clare Boothe Luce's famous quote, "No good deed goes unpunished," which I'm sure you know.
That's very good.
And
Thank
one more
you.
gift,
I like
just
that.
to put all your goodies in today, our Clare Boothe Luce Policy Institute tote bag.
Wonderful.
Great.
Thank you so much.
And from Heritage, you may have a copy, but this can be your office copy of the Heritage Guide to the Constitution. As you pointed out, it's in the Constitution to provide for the common defense, one of the few responsibilities of our federal government, and it's autographed by former Attorney General Ed Meese to you. So on behalf of Heritage, we thank you so much for your service, and we invite you all to join us in individual conversations with the Congresswoman and across the lobby for lunch. We have some sandwiches for you. So thanks again for joining us today, and be sure to follow us on the Protect America events remaining in the month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.